Good night and welcome to Mindful Live 152. I am your host Nathan Springer. Thank you for being here. We are streaming live over on TikTok, on Instagram, and now on YouTube too. If you are streaming this over on TikTok or Instagram, you can feel free to head over to the YouTube channel at any point in time, maybe after the live, and feel free to subscribe over there, Nathan Springer on YouTube. And the benefit with that is you are able to see all of the lives and see the stories scrolling behind me. And I also drop nearly daily videos on this YouTube channel too. Take them in. There are some if you would like to jump in there are some really interesting videos already waiting on you. Many of them, head over there, Nathan Springer on YouTube. Don't feel free, just do it, Empress Rooney says, and I agree with her. Just do it. Head over to YouTube, be sure to subscribe. Don't feel free, do it. All right. Now that is over, this is being brought to you today by Mindful Education. As per usual, if you are interested in learning pods for any age group from preschool straight up to CXE age groups, learning pods are basically small group classes with a homeschool styled education, homeschool style teaching geared at making sure that that smaller group is more comfortable and making the learning more enjoyable and more free for them. Smaller groups, in-person groups, they're not online classes, in-person pod learning style. Also, we offer private tutoring services for most of the CXE and CAPE subjects. If you are interested in that also, feel free to contact us and we'll move on from there. All right, tonight we're talking cannabis, we're talking herb, we're talking weed. Yes, I did get the page. Thank you very much, Nisi. Ensure that cases are dealt with in an expeditious manner. Well, we're talking herb, but right before we get into that, there was a discussion we were having before we started over on YouTube here about the judicial system and what exactly do you do about that. It's not exactly something that is obvious or easy to solve. It's not something that is so easy. You know, in times gone before, if somebody misbehaved, you threw them into exile, and I don't have to think about you anymore. You're in exile. I exile you from my community. I exile you from my nation, my civilization. You go somewhere else and be someone else's problem, or you go into the wilderness and be a nomad by yourself, or be a little hermit by yourself. Be a little hermit by yourself, and no one has that to worry about. But now in modern times, you can't exile people. There's nowhere else to go. So you have to do something with them, and that's where the prisons come in. And yes, there are many critiques to make about the judicial system, but the reality is that problem in and of itself is not exactly an easy problem to deal with. What do you do with people who misbehave? Is the right thing to do with people who misbehave just to lock them in a room and throw away the key and hope that 20 years later, somehow by some magic trick, they will be better off when you let them back out into the population? No, that doesn't seem sensible. But if somebody is indeed violent, do you just leave them with the general population? What do you do? It's not exactly a 1 + 1 = 2 straightforward thing to decide what you're going to do with them. Not excusing the fact that there is indeed a lot of corruption, a lot of mishandling inside of our judicial system. However, we're not focusing on the judicial system itself today. We're focusing on something that might actually be clogging the judicial system, ironically. You know, the judicial system. That word kind of has a sticky way on your tongue. Judicial. Doesn't flow off the tongue very easily. I mean, prison was supposed to be a place of rehabilitation, not detainment. Supposed to be. But I think that was always a fool's paradise. That was always wishful thinking. That somehow, can you imagine the amount of resources that would need to be put into a prison to really make it into a rehabilitation center? Like, think about this, right? A young man who might be 20 years old and has gotten into a life of crime, violent crime, really bad, horrible guy, maybe he's committed a murder or two, something like that. What kind of services would that young man need at the age of 20? What kind of services would he need to be able to be rehabilitated. Now, that's assuming that it's automatic that you can rehabilitate everyone. I am not even giving that assumption, because personally I think there's human nature and people could decide what they want to do. You cannot make somebody be rehabilitated. If somebody wants to live a life of crime, that's all on them and they can do that. However, let's say even let's leave it with the supposition that this person can be rehabilitated and they want to be rehabilitated. How much resources do you think a 20-year-old young man would need in order to be rehabilitated? Maybe he needs a trauma specialist to speak about his upbringing, the father that abused them and then left them all before he reached 5. Then he might have to speak to another therapist about his life with his mother, and his mother might have been a drug abuser, and he speaks about that. And then when he gets through that amount of trauma, then he has to go and speak to a legal consultant. Some lawyer has to tell him exactly what he has to confess to about the crimes involved when he was in this gang, about what he needs to do in order. When there's just so much needs to be done. Like, maybe if we had a facility that took care of 5 young men only and saw about them only, yeah, they may have been able to rehabilitate them. But when you consider a facility with thousands of troubled young men, how do you even start rehabilitating them is a very difficult question. I give props to everyone who is attempting to do it, and there are many NGOs and private organizations, churches and religious institutes that go around attempting to do this. But on a state level, that is very difficult. I say this very regularly. I believe a lot of our solutions are not from the state level. A lot of these things, the solutions we are looking for, aren't to come from the government. They are to come from the people. We have lost several of the regular societal solutions for this. We've lost our social institutions of the family. We've lost our social institutions of the church and religious institutions. So there may have once been a time where this person who is misbehaving, the rehabilitation could have been the responsibility of their family, of their religious organization. But when we have atomized ourselves so much that we do not have those connections anymore, the only main connection that holds us together is the fact that we all reside in the same country of Trinidad and Tobago. So therefore, the overarching belief that holds us all together would just be our constitution, would just be the law of the land. And then is where we bounce up into so many problems. The first thing is acknowledging that we need to have the desire to fix the problem. We lack the desire. The first thing is acknowledging that we need to have that desire. But we'll talk about this another night. No problems, Solomon. You're right, rehab was a lie to sell imprisonment. Like, there are 2 options. You have the punitive punishments, and then you have the restorative, rehabilitative punishments. Well, you mightn't call that punishments. The idea of punitive punishment is you want to punish this person. They did something wrong. You want them to feel it, as it were. That's what the punishment is about. It's payback for what you did, punitive in nature. While rehabilitative is that you're not even trying to punish the person really and truly. You're trying to fix them. Yes, I know we don't rehabilitate, but although we don't rehabilitate, you still need that taking people off the street thing. You still need that. It's a difficult thing. But as that was a bit of digression at the beginning there. We're talking about the thing that actually might be clogging this judicial system: weed. So many people in our judicial system, and that's a factual thing, many people know about that. So many people in our judicial system are just locked up there for weed. And when you think about that, that does not make sense. That does not make sense. So many, like, I always think this has always been something that perplexed me. When I look and they show you 3 van loads of police officers and another truckload of regiment fellas, and they all trekked 3 hours into the Maturita forest to find 100 plants and dig out 100 plants and burn it down. Like, when I think about this, I'm like, something does not add up. Suleiman, I agree 100% with that. Just by the way, remand is not supposed to be a sentence of 15 or 17 years. I believe that 100%. That should not be. Of course, of course. But that's a whole lengthy discussion, as you rightly pointed out. But yes, it always frustrated me when I see so much of our law enforcement resources are spent in digging up and burning a plant. Like, really and truly, this does not make sense. Like, think about it logically. Do we spend thousands of dollars in police and army for them to go into the forest looking for a plant to dig it up and burn it? Like, think about that. It does not add up. It really does not add up. And in the argument for legalization, don't worry, we're getting into the further discussions there, but before we get into the health side and social ills or benefits in the argument for legalization, I think the whole problems in the criminality surrounding the drug trade would kind of disappear if it was legal. That's my belief, and some places seem to show that as factual, because I've said this before in previous lives. The reason that there's so much crime involved in the drug trade, in marijuana selling, in after a certain time when a rank is thrown out. I understand that too, Chelsea Banton. Don't disagree. But yeah, the reason there's so much crime involved in the drug trade is because they are in an illegal business. They are selling something that is outside the bounds of the law. So if I am selling marijuana and somebody steals what I am selling, I cannot go to the police and report a theft. You understand? I'm outside the bounds of the law. So I have to get protection from somewhere else or something else. I have to protect myself. And that's why there's so much violence involved in that trade. You're selling something outside the bounds of the law. You do not have the protection of the legal framework surrounding you. So if something goes wrong, you have to see about it yourself. So crime is involved. Violent crime is involved. What would happen if it was legal? I think a lot of that would disappear. You wouldn't have people killing each other for a buck if you could plant your own and just buy it from a neighbor who's planting their own, like lettuce. Prohibition has always created millionaires. So true. And so what? I'm not reading that full name. And so what is correct? Prohibition has always created millionaires. You don't prohibit things like that. And the easier something is to produce, the harder it is to prohibit. For example, alcohol. All you need is a little fermentation and some sugar, and you get alcohol. So to prohibit it, people are just going to make their own in their backyard, as the United States found out in the 1920s and 30s. And as we found out for this entire century here, if you prohibit weed, it's just going to become an underworld market. It's not something you can actually stop. Dylan Bikram says, in drugs, I believe that control is much more efficient and beneficial than a complete legal ban. I believe that too. Yeah, so it doesn't really make sense trying to prohibit that. It does not work. It just does not work. However, I could understand some arguments for prohibition, especially when looking at some of the latest studies coming out from the herbs. All right, let's jump into that article and I'll tell you what I've been thinking about for the day as I saw this article over on The Guardian. Report suggests 1 in every 5 TNT adults using marijuana. If you're over on the YouTube, just by the way, Guardian has this massive picture at the start there. I'm describing it for those of you who aren't over on the YouTube and seeing it. This massive picture with someone and looks like a spliff or something they have there with a lighter and stuff. And the caption for the picture is, "A man prepares a stick of marijuana for smoking." Like, whoever wrote the caption on this picture, they aren't familiar with marijuana language. Who calls weed a stick of marijuana? A stick? A spliff? A blunt? A roach? A stick? Like a stick? Okay, interesting. Anyway, 1 out of every 5 adults may be using cannabis daily in this country. A recent international study has suggested, and compared to other countries, this is very high. You all get that one? It's very high. 1 in 5 people. Ha. Anyway, Trinidad also has a high rate of psychoses compared to other countries that have been researched, and cannabis may be contributing to that, the study has suggested. This data forms part of the findings from the International Research Program on Psychoses in Diverse Setting, Intrepid 2's report, which investigated psychotic disorders in India, Nigeria, and Trinidad. I find it interesting, the three choices they chose there: India, Nigeria, and Africa, and then Trinidad. Interesting choices. We observed a very high prevalence of cannabis use in Trinidad compared to international findings. Dr. Joni Lee Powell, who was the official head of this, said, according to Lee Powell, the research conducted by the team found that 19.6% of the people surveyed in Trinidad were daily users of cannabis. That's about 20% of the people. In Bago, it must be 1 in 2. So you feel Bago running a 50% kind of number up there. I don't know that. but it's really in Bago, serious. There's a lot of ganja in Tobago. Like, how does all of that ganja reach into Tobago? Who brings all of that weed into Tobago? Very interesting question. TNT's 20% was compared to the data captured in another study that found across Europe, which was found that their daily cannabis use in London was 11.7% and 13.1% in Amsterdam. Now, these figures, it might be blessings, Megsy. I think this is a super interesting topic. Thank you very much. These numbers may be, it might be interesting to find out how exactly they did the study to figure out these numbers. That might be telling to know if the difference is as significant as it seems, because both in India and in Nigeria they found the usage to be under 4%, which sounds strange. Now, it might be a key factor also to look at the catchment areas that they study. The catchment area for this study in Trinidad consisted of the municipalities of Diego Martin, Port of Spain, San Juan Lavantil, Tunapuna Piaco, Arima, Chaguanas, and Sangre Grande. And I'll think in Trinidad in Trinidad specifically, Bago, it seems like the whole Bago, according to Roni, the whole Bago is in a puff of smoke. But in Trinidad, if you were looking for the places with the most concentrated use of the herb, it might exactly be in those built-up urban areas. One of the ways they investigated psychosis. So, by the way, this study wasn't just on marijuana use and cannabis use. It was the use as it related to psychosis. And what psychosis is you don't have a solid grasp on reality. You could be hallucinating things. You're seeing things that other people aren't seeing. You're hearing things that other people aren't hearing. You're believing things happen that didn't really happen. You're being delusional. So that's what psychosis is. Your grip on reality isn't too strong. And obviously there are varying levels to psychosis that different people might have. And they were studying the link that there might be between psychosis and cannabis use. The report focused on residents in the catchment area between the ages of 18 to 64. All right, let's look into it. Cannabis users more likely to develop a psychotic disorder. Lipo said, according to the data, those who use cannabis more than once a week are twice as likely to develop a psychotic disorder. And those with a cannabis dependency are 5 times more likely to have a psychotic disorder. It should be a bit alarming. I hope it is, Lipo said. In TNT, at least 3 studies have confirmed that between 40 to 60% of first admission cases for psychosis are related to cannabis use, particularly for males. Lipo said within Trinidad, the groups that use the most cannabis are Afro-Trinidadian men, who also have the highest rates of psychoses. So, yeah. The infamous green man theory then. Well, yes, if you're seeing the green man, then yeah, that's some psychosis there. Good night, I'm the serviceman that somebody is dreaming about. I personally know 2 persons who suffer psychosis from marijuana, and both were male. See, Megsy over on Instagram is saying that she is a witness of something like this, to say that it seems like there's some accuracy in it. Lipow said the data showed that a quarter of the adults who used cannabis did so for the first time when they were under the age of 16. And I believe I did a lengthy video on this. If you're interested in looking at just the video on this without all of the necessary discussion that we might have in between, today's video, well, yes, today's video, that's Tuesday's video, 4 o'clock today, was on this topic. So you could go head over to my YouTube and see it all concise and nice, but we're just discussing here. I believe the problem here, could this be a factor that's contributing to school violence? I have no doubt that that may have a part to play. But, as I was saying, I believe the main point here might be just that. The age at which so many of them began smoking. Something that was noted in numerous other studies is the age that you start has an important part to play in this. Another study that was written about in The Guardian, this came from since 2014, daily ganja use tied to early psychotic disorder. In a study of adults who experienced psychosis for the first time, having smoked marijuana daily was linked to an earlier age of onset of the disorder, according to UK researchers. Among more than 400 people in South London admitted to hospitals with a diagnosed psychotic episode, the study team found the heaviest smokers of high-potency cannabis averaged about 6 years younger than patients who had not been smoking pot. Psychosis, we know what the meaning of it is. In the new study, researchers focused on patterns of cannabis use, gender, and the relationship of those factors to the timing of a first psychotic episode. So this study, what they didn't focus on whether you used cannabis or not in your psychosis. They focused on how you used cannabis in terms of determining how your psychosis came about. And what they found was the more regular use of cannabis turned out to an earlier onset of psychosis. And then the next thing they found was the potency of the cannabis. In a previous study based on police seizures of marijuana in southeast London, they found different varieties of THC level. THC, tetrahydrocannabinoid, I believe is the word, is the active hallucinatory agent inside of marijuana, and the THC level fluctuates differently based on the strain of marijuana. So when they go and they ask them what you have on the block, what they're trying to figure out is the different strains of marijuana that vary in potency levels. And in this study previously, in the Trinidad and Tobago study, they pointed out that the ganja in Trinidad is known to be of pretty high potency. So Trinis smokers seem to gravitate to a much higher potency THC level. They also found that patients, this is going back to the UK study here, they also found that patients using cannabis at age 15 or younger preferentially smoked high potency cannabis more often and had an earlier onset of psychosis than those who started using cannabis after the age of 15. So here's another factor playing in here. When you start smoking younger, you tend to use higher potency cannabis, higher potency marijuana, stronger weed. To say it in more layman terms, you're using stronger weed. You want the strong thing. And that is understandable because the more cannabis you use, it tends to numb your cannabinoid receptors. That's in your brain. Those are the receptors. Let's put this in a more layman term. That's the part in your brain that receives the THC, receives the chemicals, and gives you the high feeling. Those receptors in your brain, the more cannabis you use, those receptors start to get more and more numb, as it were. Now, cannabis is strange. You could stop for 1 month and it kind of resets, and the next time it is used, you will get that feeling nearly like the first time again. But if you continue over a lengthy period of time, the same amount of cannabis, the same strain of cannabis doesn't do the same thing it once did. So you tend to be looking for that stronger and that stronger and that stronger strain. What this study didn't take into consideration is people suffering from mental sickness. We'll get to that, Mr. So What? We'll get to that. We haven't reached the end of the study yet. So when you start younger, you use stronger. So again, we're relating that right back to the Trinidad study where they found that quarter of the users started before the age of 16. So is it just that the use of cannabis started the psychosis, or is it the fact that they started before 16, which meant that they started to use stronger cannabis, which then would have increased their risk? This study adds to the literature of it. Compton, the guy overseeing the study, cautioned that this study specifically focused on patterns of cannabis use among people who all developed psychosis, but did not compare them to users who did not experience psychosis. The question here, the thorny question, is whether they might otherwise have developed the disease or would not have had mental illness. It's a distinction they have not figured out yet. So what they're trying to ask here is it that the use of cannabis triggered this mental illness, or were these people already susceptible to mental illness and then they went in to use cannabis, which would have triggered that? Good night, the mayor. Tony, the ambassador, says, I think as well, on top of using a strong strain, some have other chemicals in them. Well, that's a whole other topic too, where it is known that some people mix cannabis with other drugs on purpose. Some people do it on purpose. Some people have it done to them without their knowledge sometimes, and they smoke a blacks, as it's known sometimes, and that can send some people crazy one time. So yeah, that is a factor. But here they're not even talking about tainted marijuana, about tampered marijuana. They're talking straight ganja. Real stuff, the pure thing. So yeah, they were wondering here, how much of it is it that these people may have already had susceptibilities, good night Serenity, may already have had susceptibilities, and then the cannabis use triggered some of those susceptibilities. So some people have asked in other studies, there are many studies on cannabis. In other studies, some people have asked, is it that people who have susceptibility to mental illness are more likely to self-medicate themselves by becoming regular users of cannabis? And then obviously you're going to see that they trigger some psychotic episode, and then they're like, okay, the cannabis triggered the psychotic episode. But is it that the cannabis triggered that psychotic episode on its own, or is it that this person was already predisposed to that psychosis and that made them self-medicate with a drug that would then trigger it more likely? It's not a sure thing. You know, you're wondering, as it were, is it the chicken or the egg? Which one came first? You may wonder. But there are other studies that seem to point out that the cannabis on its own has some effect, especially looking at the age of initiation. So a study here that is in the schizophrenia bulletin, a PubMed study. This is an official medical study. That's the question. Why make it worse or speed it up to the surface? That's the thing, little panting. There may be some people that may be able to use cannabis and there are some benefits out of it, may be able to use it and get the benefits out of it. But maybe if you are a person who already has certain comorbidities or preconditions that make you susceptible to certain mental problems, cannabis might be the last thing you want to tamper with. As I spoke about in my contemplation for today, which was a snippet from the main video I did on YouTube, and one of the effects of cannabis is it tampers with your novelty receptors, with your perception of novelty. How you think about something new, you know? When you see something new, you get a feeling. Yeah, there's a good feeling about, ooh, that's something new and cool. Ooh, that's something creative. I like that. Right. That's novelty. You're supposed to get that feeling when you experience or see something new. Part of what cannabis does is it makes that feeling happen more regularly. So you could watch your hand if you're high enough and you're like, wow. Wow. This is you ever notice that your hand have 5 fingers, boy? Wait. Because you're high and your perception of novelty is being tweaked. The problem with that is it makes boredom seem really fun. It makes boredom seem lots of fun. And if you're playing around with how your brain perceives boredom, how your brain perceives novelty, can you imagine as a young person who is supposed to be studying, supposed to be driving yourself to excel, if you get really comfortable feeling novel in boredom? You understand? If you get comfortable feeling good about your boredom, you sit with your 5 partners sitting on 5 other concrete blocks in an abandoned house with vines overgrowing it, smoking off of the same piece of sponge, feeling your friends spit, and you do that for 6 hours every day. The only reason that feels like fun to you is because you're high. And that becomes problematic. That's even beside the mental issues. That's even besides the mental issues. If during especially that formative phase in your life, you are giving so much of your time away to feeling good about boredom, then what do you think is going to happen? You would lose the drive to push to do something further. Again, you're saying again, Nisi, but then you probably don't understand how the block runs. That's how the block goes. Pull, pass, pull, pass, and then the new guy on the block who doesn't quite understand how to pull without wetting his lips too much. He pulls, and then when he passes it to the next man, it's like saturated, and the next man still comes on. You know, I know a racist man. The man is a racist. Real racist out there. But when it comes to weed, that man sharing weed with any race. It's a strange thing. But anyway, I think that captures a lot of our young men. As I said again in the contemplation, young men are an important resource for our country. Very, very important. Not discounting the importance of young women. That shouldn't even need to be said. But young men, when it comes to the economic driving of a country, that's an important part. If you have, let's say, 20% of the young men in a country lost to boredom because they feel good about being bored, they don't have the impetus. The thing with boredom, what boredom is your brain telling you should be going to do something. You shouldn't be doing nothing at this point. Go do something. And you're telling your brain, you're giving your brain a whole cloud that says, you know what, I'm good about doing nothing. That is killing a lot of this country's productivity. There are so many young men trapped just wasting time on a corner, so many places in this country. Anyway, the age of initiation of cannabis use predicts age of onset of psychosis, the 7 to 8 year trend. Now, an interesting thing they found in this study. What they did in this study was they investigated the age at which someone first began smoking marijuana or using cannabis, and then they looked at the age at which psychosis first set in to see if there's any disparity there. And what they found is there's around a 7 to 8 year gap. Cannabis may exert, this is a conclusion they found, cannabis may exert a cumulative toxic effect on individuals on the pathway to developing psychosis, the manifestation of which is delayed for approximately 7 to 8 years, regardless of age at which cannabis use was initiated. They are saying, even if you started at a little later age, within 7 to 8 years, if you are susceptible, generally you see the onset of psychosis, regardless of the age. Now, this, when I first read this study, it made me second guess some of the other studies I read, because other studies I read seem to highlight the fact that cannabis use is worse in younger people. The effects of cannabis use is horrible in young people, but there's an age at which it changes. And the age I seem to have read about was something along, you are pontificating on what you seem not to be intimately aware of and bogus study. So listen, someone mute, and so what? He already has a Cuscal word in his name. That's not how this works. If you are, you can go over to my YouTube channel. You can find these studies on the National Institute for Health. This is where I'm reading this bogus study from. And I'm not pontificating on things I don't know about. I'm pontificating on a study, on a scientific study that is rigorous, that went through how they figured out these conclusions. So let's not do this. Let's not do this. A lot of the times, what happens with many people like that is when you have vested interest in your weed smoking habit, you are an addict. Here's a problem with weed. Cannabis doesn't generally have any addictive properties on its own. There isn't an addictive chemical. There isn't an, good night, Tyson. There isn't an addictive chemical, as in alcohol itself is an addictive chemical. In cigarettes, the nicotine itself is an addictive chemical. There's a chemical addiction that you get to it. Cannabis still can become addictive. You can become addicted to the high. You're addicted to that feeling, that high. Just as people can be addicted to likes. Like getting many likes on a post is a high, and you can get addicted to that. So you can get addicted to the high. Well, dependency and addiction is splitting hairs. I think that's splitting hairs. It's pretty much an addiction. And there's also a mechanical addiction you could get addicted to. So for many people, the feeling of smoking something is the addiction. So that's why for some people, in order to quit, they have to get something else to replace that mechanical feeling that they had. That you're always doing this, and now every 15 minutes, you're feeling the need to do this. You're feeling the need to do this. And that's another thing. So some people, when confronted with the addiction, instead of being reasonable and looking introspectively and seeing, am I really addicted to this? Is this benefiting me some way? They say, no. All of the evidence proving that there might be some negatives to this are wrong. All of the evidence is wrong, and what I think about when I'm high with my other 5 high friends and we're saying, yeah, boy, this make real sense. And that's the only thing that adds up to us. I'm not saying that you don't use your cannabis here, but I'm saying you have to try to think of things more critically. Yep, that's why vaping got big, but is it better? Vaping may not be better. Popcorn lungs, anyone? Go Google that one, popcorn lungs, to see what that's about. So yeah. This study seemed to say that at any age you started, it's going to have that negative deleterious effect within 7 to 8 years. And I remember there were numerous studies in the earlys that seemed to point out that the main negative effects of cannabis are not found in people who started using like after the age of 25, etc. So I wanted to dig in a little deeper to see if this study is saying that, you know what? Any age you start doesn't matter. Psychosis may come knocking in 7 to 8 years. Subaru 868 says the cons far outweigh the pros of cannabis. The only people to benefit will be the 1%. Again, cannabis will follow agriculture and be sidelined to oil and gas and not benefit the economy. Maybe not. Many of the places that legalized it aren't seeing as big of a bump in their economy as they would have hoped. But here's something I noticed. Here's something I noticed when looking at the chart of this. So they have a chart here that shows the results of their study, where they have the age of initiation, the age the person first started using cannabis, compared to the age of the onset of psychosis. They plotted a nice bar graph with that. And if you started at the age of 12, if your first... that's really young. But I am very much aware in Trinidad and Tobago. That 12 isn't unheard of. There are some people before 12. But if you started at the age of 12, if you have that predisposal, the likelihood is by the age of 20, psychosis may be coming knocking. Now, I wanted to see up to the latest age groups, the oldest age groups, what that looked like. And from the age of 22, if you started at the age of 22, what they found is the onset is 32. So, at 12, the onset is 20. At 22, the onset is 32. That does seem to be a lengthening trend. It seems the older you start, it seems it may be the longer it takes for the onset to happen. So I followed that up. There's another study there. As I said, there are many professional standard studies on cannabis that you could go and see conclusions about things you're curious about. And this latest study that I looked at directly the gray matter in people's brain. So they did scans of people's brains to see what was happening based on their use of cannabis. Association between age of cannabis initiation and gray matter covariance in networks in recent onset psychosis. And here's what they found. Earlier cannabis initiation was associated with more severe symptoms in their cohort. Earlier cannabis initiation was associated greater gray matter volume in the previous identified cerebellar schizophrenia related network had a significant association with early cannabis use independent of several possibly confounding factors. So okay, let me explain that line there. They found that when you use cannabis early, it has that deleterious effect on the schizophrenia part of your brain, the part of your brain in charge of you getting schizophrenia. Schizophrenia might be the most common thing that is called you're going mad in Trinidad and Tobago. The part of your brain responsible for that saw most effect from earlier use of cannabis. And what they found was that was regardless of confounding factors. What that means is regardless of whether you had a precondition, whether you had a comorbidity, whether you had a family history, it's regardless. The earlier you start using cannabis, the worse the effect on your actual brain. Moreover, gray matter volume in the cerebellar network was associated with lower volume in another network previously associated with schizophrenia. These findings are in line with previous investigations in healthy cannabis users and suggest that early initiation of cannabis perturbs the developmental trajectory of certain structural brain networks in a manner imparting risk for psychosis later in life. And here's why that makes so much sense. If you are aware of brain biology, your brain actually continues growing and developing well into your 20s, up sometimes to 25, 26. And if we do find that the use of cannabis, because cannabis, here's a strange thing, here's a unique thing, something very interesting. Our brain has cannabinoid receptors. Our brain has, think of it this way. You know those 3-prong plugs there, and there are 2-prong plugs, and then there are 220-volt plugs. You know, I don't know how many of you know your electrical. There are different shapes in different plugs. Some air conditions may have a different shape of plug, etc., etc. Still here, just on YouTube, I love to see the data. That's good. That's good. The data is the important part, in fact. But yeah, if you know those different types of plugs, a receptor is a certain kind of socket that is made for a specific plug. And our brain has cannabinoid receptors. They have a cannabinoid outlet, plug outlet in your brain. So it's as if your brain was made to receive cannabinoid. Now, listen, the people who are real big fans of the herb, they love hearing things like that because it seems to suggest that the human body was made to receive the herb, you know. We have receptors. If we have receptors for cannabinoid, we should be taking in some cannabinoids. But if we do find that what happens with these receptors is it has an effect on the brain. And the effect it has on the brain is as such that once the brain is in development, it's a deleterious effect. It hampers the development of the brain. That doesn't seem surprising to me. It doesn't seem surprising at all. Cannabis affects the brain. If the brain is still in development, and if the brain is still in development, it has really negative effects on that developing brain. That makes perfect sense to me. Because of just a side note, because of the fact that our brain naturally has cannabinoid receptors, I always believe that children are high. This is my solemn belief. Like, I think children make some cannabinoids on their own and they are just extremely high. That's my personal belief about children. Like, what does high do? Can you please save this life? Thanks. I will. By the way, simple Yuki, all of the lives are saved over on YouTube. I do keep some on Instagram sometimes, but I like to try to, head over to YouTube. You'll see it on YouTube. So if you want to see this live, I will leave it up on Instagram for a little while longer, but the better place you would be able to see it would be over on YouTube, where the actual data, the studies are behind me scrolling as I talk about them. But the brain retains neuroplasticity throughout adulthood, but neuroplasticity decreases as you get older and older. Listen, there are some experiments they do on baby's brain. If you take out a chunk of a baby brain, literally a chunk of a baby's brain, it can heal itself. If you do that to an old person, that's not going to work. There are several theories on dementia that seem to suggest that the onset of dementia in some cases has to do with the fact that the neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to heal itself. Thank you very much, Simple Yuki. The ability of the brain to heal itself, the ability of the brain to recover is lost as you get older, and that's why you kind of lose your ability to, remain sane sometimes as you get older. People just need good habits to promote development. That's true. But as I was saying, some of the effects of cannabis is that colors look brighter, things feel more exciting, you have that feeling of novelty, everything is marvelous. And listen, that seems to me how children see the world. I think children are really high. I haven't been able to prove this yet, but I think eventually an experiment will be done that figures out children have some kind of cannabinoid pulsing through their veins, and the childhood is weed, well, not weed, is highness, and you get progressively less high as you come out of childhood. Like, if you think about it like that, of course a natural high, of course, I'm not saying people are feeding them weed, it's natural. If you think about it like that, like a toddler, think about the age from 3 years to 25, and at 3 is like you smoke the hardest hard, and from 3 to 25 you're just getting more and more sober, you're coming down from the high. Nathan, are you speaking about marijuana from experience? Well, I'm talking about children here, so I'm speaking about childhood from experience. I remember spinning in a circle to get dizzy and spiked. Yes! Yeah, your vision and hearing is heightened. That's true, Simple Yuki. Nelly, if you go and look at every side effect of cannabis, it's a side effect of childhood. Children be high. And when you leave childhood, what's happening is you're falling off of the high. You laugh less too. One of the telltale ways you can tell someone is getting older is they smile and laugh less. That's factual. From the age of toddler to the age of adulthood, you progressively begin to laugh, smile, and maybe enjoy things less. The reason all of those festivals are marvelous to those children is they are high. I am telling you, that's my theory. At some point in time, we will prove it. The takeaway from tonight, children be high. Yes, that's the takeaway. And the takeaway is, if you are young, stay away from cannabis. That's serious. And I think that's actually the main part in discussing legalizing cannabis. In terms of the societal side, as I said in the very beginning, I think in terms of the violence and the crime, it would benefit from the legalization of cannabis. In terms of adults, big people, I don't think there will be many more adults using cannabis if it's legal. Because in Trinidad, finding weed is not a hard thing. How many adults do you think there are in Trinidad who want to try weed but just have not? I think just about every adult who wants to try cannabis can try cannabis and has tried it before. It's not that hard to get in Trinidad and Tobago. So legalizing it isn't all of a sudden, this is my opinion, legalizing it isn't all of a sudden going to make a whole big group of adults start to use cannabis. I don't think that's going to happen. But what legalizing it can do is make access to it so much easier that you create the problem of youth access to it. And if it is a fact that some young people have very significant deleterious effects on their mental health and on their general development from using cannabis, that's not something you want to become very prevalent among the youth. Simple Yuki says, I'm telling you, nothing tastes better than when you're high, your vision and hearing is heightened, but it's not for everyone. Every corner is a pusherman. That's true, Simple Yuki. You think there's a link to high usage and depression in youths these days? Yes, there's. That's widely known. There's a link to regular marijuana use and depression. Because when you're not high, you're going to feel depressed. Remember, it's tweaking your feeling of novelty. So now I'm feeling happy and that novel feeling about everything in my life. Then when I'm not high, it's like, wow, everything is just so boring and drab. Remember, I was just saying, I think of it like you're really high at 3 and you progressively come down from your high as you get older to probably 25, 26. Imagine for me, if you could have switched yourself to a toddler, and let's not use a toddler, switch yourself to a child and enjoy the life of a child for 2 hours, and then in half hour, it switches back from a childhood enjoyment to grown up. Imagine that. Imagine if you were 10 and then switched to the responsibilities of 26 in a snap. Yeah, I think the likelihood of depression is pretty high. You know, as you say that about depression, I have some views on depression. Obviously, there's a side to it where there is illness and there's mental imbalance and you need help, etc., etc. But I think we have over-pathologized depression. As in, many people are not sick with depression. They're sad. You're depressed because your life is depressing. If you're living a depressing life, there's no surprise you're depressed. That's not some kind of pathological illness where, oh my God, you are depressed and you need medicine. Not really. You're depressed because your life is depressing. Maybe you don't need medicine. You need to make the decisions to not make your life so depressing. Because cause depression when they sober up and face reality, and it's a cycle. Yes, it is, Cooper. Yes, it is. Many people who are depressed because they live depressing lives. Live a less depressing life. And then, if you're living a less depressing life, and then you're still depressed, then maybe there may be a significant issue. But if you're living a life, you have no friends, you have no romantic partner, you aren't talking to your family, you aren't on good terms with your family, you aren't in a good career, you have no dreams for the future, you have no dreams for school, of course you're depressed. Like, you're supposed to be depressed. What you being depressed is your body telling you, hey, your life going horrible, try to do something about it. And then what many of us say in modern times is we need to go and sit on a couch and tell a therapist all about this and let them give us some drugs to numb that depression. No, you need to go out there and fix your life a little bit. Careful, bro, the victim mindset gonna feel attacked and triggered. I really don't care. Depression would be inevitable. Correct. If you live a depressing life, it would be inevitable. Let's think about this. Something that is painfully obvious to anyone paying attention. People in people in sub-Saharan Africa don't generally suffer with depression. And their life is not easier than yours. I can assure you that. Why is it in the countries that are most affluent, that have the most advanced technology, there you see depression the most? Maybe, have people thought, maybe it's because you no longer have a purpose in life? You don't have to work to live. You'll get food anyhow. You don't know what you're doing here. We have separated ourselves from religion and serious concepts of God. So you have no real functioning larger scheme of thinking of this whole life. Of course you're depressed. Of course you're depressed. Like, sir, ma'am, go find a husband or a wife. Go fix your career. Make sure you have a good relationship with your family. Make sure you're as educated as you can be, as you're intelligent enough to be. And if you have fixed all of those, obvious areas, then maybe you could talk about depression. That's my view on that. All right. I think that's all I have for now, folks. Any further questions or comments before I dive out? I'm waiting. We have to saga boy it now. Yep. Because they grow accustomed to being on recruit difficulties as other countries that are going through serious times appreciate it. Simple, Yuki. I like that one. Because they grew accustomed to being on recruit difficulties as other countries that are going through serious times appreciate the value of happiness. I think especially young men, and I have a reason for saying this. I was watching Vice News on Guyana VP. I'm not sure what you're... No, I didn't see that. I saw the Vice News. Was it on the Chinese? If it's that you're talking about, the Chinese influence in Guyana, I saw that. Yeah. Especially young men. Not sidelining young women, but I have a reason for that. Hear me out. I think young men need difficulty in life. Yes, Tyson, there is a life tomorrow. I think young men need difficulty in life. They would search it out if left to their own devices. They need that challenge, and that challenge helps to give them a more purpose in life. They want something challenging to do. You do not want to make life a paved, easy walk through for young men. Now, the reason I say young men is I think for women, there is a difference. There is some difficulty inherent in being a woman, you know, and they're very much aware of that difficulty from the age of like 12, 13. It's not the same. That kind of lifelong difficulty is a given there. But for young men particularly, if you think about young men in the West, many of them have too easy of a life. They have nothing to challenge them. So obviously, they're feeling purposeless. I have no purpose here. There's nothing I'm doing in this life that is challenging or difficult. Anybody could do anything I'm doing. Why am I even here? You know what? It's best I'm not here anymore. That's why we like Red Gal. Oh, okay, Dylan Vikram. Okay, I hear you, sir. The reason that Red Gal are pursued is because men are seeking out difficulties. You must laugh, Nisi. I'll ask Mister if that's true. They did an undercover investigation with Chinese contractors and they got in for the VP taking bribes. Yes, I saw that. Yes, but that's not new. Listen, the president in Guyana was facing 14 charges of corruption, I believe it was, before he became president. The reason his party put him as president is because Guyana has a law where they cannot continue the investigation if the man is president. So by him becoming president, the investigations had to be wrapped up and put away. So talking about the Guyanese VP taking bribes is no surprise. It's no surprise. Guyana has its fair share of corruption. That's why when I hear Guyana talking about Trinidad and they're watching Trinidad and they're saying, you know, they're not aiming to end up like Trinidad. I am glad for that. Don't aim to end up in the same way. Aim for better by all means. But if I'm looking at the general setup they have right now, their setup seems to be a perfect setup to end up worse than Trinidad, because they do have their own levels of corruption that are rampant over there. All right. Any further comments? I was hiding from an ex-stalker yesterday and the TV was stuck on Vice YouTube chat. Listen, Rooney, every day is a story with you, Rooney. You have to start to do your lives of your own where you dictate these insane stories you have every day. What do you mean hide it? Never mind. I don't even want to know. An ex-stalker. Like, you mean real, like, police report stalker? Yikes. I wish you the best. I hope he stays his distance. Maybe that might be reason enough to go and apply for your firearm license. But yeah, hope that sorts out. Wait. Your stalker is a woman? It's his ex? I'm sorry for you if you are over on Instagram or YouTube right now and trying to figure out what I'm talking about, but Rooney is giving me some rundown here, and I'm trying to ascertain the facts of the case. So your current person, their ex, is your stalker. Ooh. Oof. He's a hot number out there. You're a wet man. Careful. Oh, you're to say it like those red pill guys, you're with a high value man out there. Yeah, she crazy. She does message me. See, fellas, stay away from the crazy people, eh? Stay away from crazy women, guys. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. A crazy woman would attempt to destroy your whole life. They will burn it all down. Come on, Lifetime, this movie is writing itself. And Dylan, this is a whole movie. Yeah, she crazy. Yeah. She's definitely crazy. Fellas, let that be a lesson. Stay away from crazy. Listen, fellas, trust me. They will attempt to burn your entire life to the ground. The crazy might be interesting for the moment. It might be for some of you. Run. Run, guys. Run. Run. Ooh, this beat hard. This is a nice beat. We could go out to this beat. Thank you, folks, for tuning in. I hope you were educated, informed, or entertained, and I'll see you again for the next Mindful Live session, which is going to be tomorrow evening around 9:15 p.m. And I will see you guys then. Tomorrow is Wednesday, so tomorrow is Wednesday, the Tobago evening. Rooney, she self crazy. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Maybe after the Tobago Live tomorrow, Rooney. Laters, folks. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained, as I said, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Peace out. Peace out. Hold it down. Hold it down.